Welcome to our GrainTALK webinar on the 4R's. Today, on our webinar, we have Grain Farmers Ontario staff, myself, Laura Ferrier, agronomist, Marty Vermeersch, senior agronomist, and Mike Buttonham, sustainability and environment lead. We are joined by Kelsey Hill from Fertilizer Canada, who will share about the 4R program in Ontario, and later by Anne Vermeersch of Tillvalley Farms, who will share some of her thoughts as a CCA and farmer and how she implements the 4R strategies on her farm and for her customers. Kelsey Hill is the manager of Nutrient Stewardship at Fertilizer Canada, where she is responsible for supporting the continued development and implementation of 4R nutrient stewardship initiatives and programs across Canada. In her role, Kelsey works to support and promote the 4Rs of nutrient stewardship in Canada. She supports the policy and programs teams through coordinating the 4R designation and certification programs, and she provides support on provincial working groups and the fertilizer use survey. Kelsey grew up on her family's dairy, beef, and cash crop farm in the Ottawa Valley, where her passion for agriculture began. She holds a Bachelor of Agriculture Science with a major in crops, horticulture, and turfgrass science from the University of Guelph, and is a certified crop advisor. Welcome, Kelsey.
Thanks, Laura. So today, thanks for the introduction, and I'm excited to be here on behalf of Fertilizer Canada and excited to talk about 4R nutrient stewardship in Ontario. We appreciate the opportunity from GFO, and I'll get started here. So to begin, I'm just going to do a quick overview of 4R nutrient stewardship to kind of give some background as why Fertilizer Canada has really focused on this in the past, over the past 20 years. But you might have seen this slide before, but of course we need to look towards feeding a population of 9 billion people without an increase of agriculture land by 2050. And with this, we'll need to increase food production by up to 70%. And we really want to focus in on some of the opportunities there. And we believe nutrient stewardship and nutrients is obviously one. Now, where the 4Rs comes into this is we want to focus on doing this in a way that makes sense both economically, environmentally, and socially to ensure that we're applying nutrients in a sustainable manner. So that's when we focus in on the 4Rs of nutrient stewardship. 4R's of nutrient stewardship, they're simple in concept. So we have the right source at the right rate, right time, right place. Something you might have seen on a quiz question in your university years and been able to kind of answer. But when we focus in on the science and implementing it, as it is kind of a science-backed program, it becomes a bit more complicated as we look obviously a grower in PEI who's growing a potato production would be a little bit different than a grain grower here in Ontario. So that's why within Fertilizer Canada over these past 20 years, we've really focused in on providing technical documents and developing the 4R program and research within it to make sense for growers across Canada and allow that our agronomists and certified crop advisors out in the field to make recommendations based on these 4Rs, but as well based on the operation and opportunities they have in front of them. And now I'll talk a little bit about the evolution of 4Rs in Ontario and how we came to the 4R certification program that we do run today. So 4R nutrient stewardship in Ontario, actually this 4R certification program, it started off in Ohio and it was under the guidance of the Nutrient Stewardship Council, Ohio Agribusiness Association, and the Fertilizer Institute. And when we first started that in Ohio, it was looked towards protecting the Lake Erie water basin. And of course, when we talk about the Lake Erie water basin, that has cross-border effects. And a focus in brought it to this program in Ontario. So back in 2018, the 4R certification program was first brought in, and it was launched under close collaboration with Fertilizer Canada and our partners, the Ontario Agribusiness Association, Grain Farmers Ontario, Ontario Federation of Agriculture, Christian Farmers Federation of Ontario, and OMAFRA. So what is the 4R certification program? It's a voluntary program that we provide for nutrient service providers. Now, nutrient service provider, not a common term I think we normally use, but the definition is anyone who's providing nutrient recommendations or applications to their grower customers. So these can fall under a couple categories. So we do have the likes of agri-retailers, and we talk about agri-retailers focusing on those who maybe recommend nutrients, but also sell fertilizer and apply it for their grower customers. But then there's also the opportunity under that definition for an independent crop consultant who may not be selling and applying fertilizer, but is recommending and creating those nutrient management plans to go through this 4R certification program. The basis of the program is it's under a third-party audit by our partners, AWASA, and it looks at the nutrient service provider's ability to follow the 4Rs of nutrient stewardship under the following categories. The first category is the training of their staff and growers. So there's about 5 standards here, and the standards are focused on how they both have staff who are knowledgeable in the 4Rs. So for example, a standard requires that the nutrient service provider has a CCA on staff, and then as well how they're communicating out the 4Rs nutrient stewardship to their grower customers. So an example of that is it audits on if they are providing language in their newsletters, providing presentations, etc. The next standard category we have that we audit the nutrient service providers on is how they recommend their recommendations for nutrient management. And I do have a little bracket there saying only when it's applicable. So for example, some grower customers at an agri retailer may only getting applications. So if they're not getting a recommendation done on their field, that won't be audited for the nutrient service provider. But under that recommendation category, we have standards that focus in on ensuring that the grower's nutrient service provider's recommendation for the grower is following the 4Rs. So for example, one standard we have there requires that the recommendations follow a soil test that has been done as recently as 5 years for their nutrient management plan. The third category we have that we audit the nutrient service providers on is their ability to apply nutrients onto the soil in the way that follows 4Rs. Again, only when applicable, so our nutrient service providers who are not applying nutrients won't be audited on this category. Application nutrients focus on standards that ensure that they're not, or ensure that they're following setback distance, as well as ensure that they're not applying nutrients on a time where there is a high risk for loss. And then the final category to wrap this up for our nutrient service providers is the documentation. And the documentation audit part of the documentation part of the audit is focused on how they're documenting their training, application, and recommendations. And this really ensures that we're able to go through and do an audit with the nutrient service provider and make sure that they are in fact following the 4Rs and it's not just a kind of word of mouth that they are. So what does this all translate into? So I did do a little bit of a dive into the 4R Nutrient Stewardship Program, but really what does this mean at a grower level? So when we look at the 4Rs in Nutrient Stewardship and the 4R Certification Program, currently across Ontario, we have 24 sites that have been fully 4R certified, and out of those 24, 40 of them have also gone through a pre-audit. The pre-audit is a process that we have for growers or for nutrient service providers who are interested in becoming 4R certified, and they can work with our coaches, Paul and Lynn Warner of Warner Ag, to learn a bit more about the program before making the jump in to become fully 4R certified and working through the audit process. And out of these 24 sites, we're able to showcase how growers are utilizing 4Rs across Ontario. So currently, as of 2021, we see that we have just under 600,000 acres that have been 4R certified by these 4R retailers, as well as just under 2,500 growers who are working with these fully 4R certified sites. Currently, the impact of these sites, we're seeing about 26% across southwestern Ontario, and that's 21 sites, as we do see some sites starting to move more east, as we have 3 sites in the Peterborough region who have been fully 4R certified, and we are starting to see more interest into the Ottawa Valley region with the pre-audits and working with Paul and Lynn towards moving towards becoming fully 4R certified. The next question within the 4R certification program may be, how do I get involved? So for the growers, the best way to get involved is to contact your local agri-retailer or independent crop consultant and ask them if they are involved in the 4R certification program. We really encourage this as we're trying to gain more notice for the program, as well as encourage the want to be able to prove to the world that we're growing our crops sustainably. If your nutrient service provider is not 4R certified yet, there's still the opportunity for them, and they can look towards reaching out to Fertilizer Canada, and we'll be happy to get them on track to becoming 4R certified. I will note the first step in that is to do the pre-audit process, which we are currently offering free of charge until the end of 2021 to any interested nutrient service providers, which you can find out more information at fertilizercanada.ca. And I can also get you in contact with Paul and Lynn to make that happen. Also, if you're looking for just general information on the 4R's and nutrient stewardship, we do have a What's in It for Our Me page on Fertilizer Canada's website, which both lists all of the acre retailers and independent crop consultants who've been through the program, as well as provides technical documents for growers who are interested in learning a bit more about 4R nutrient stewardship. So I'll end on that note today. Hopefully I gave you a bit more information on our 4R certification program that we have going on in Ontario and the 4Rs that we have been working on towards for a while now. So we're really excited to see it continue. And thanks for listening today. You can find us at fertilizercanada.ca or as well reach out to myself. I'm Kay Hill at fertilizercanada.ca.
Thanks so much, Kelsey. That's great. One question I had for you is if the farmer doesn't call their retailer, is there any way that when they're walking into their retail that they would know that it's 4R certified?
Yep. So the 4R certified sites, we do provide them with their certificate of completion once they become fully 4R audit, or once they've passed their full 4R audit. So they can look for that designation. We encourage the sites to put that up in a place that everyone can see and to provide more recognition for what the efforts they're doing. As obviously this audit program, it's intense, but it's important in showcasing how we're utilizing stewardship on our land.
That's great.
Hi, Kelsey. I was also wondering, is it also listed on the website as far as which retailers in Ontario are 4R certified?
Yep. So if you go to our What's in It for Our Me page, we do have a list of agri retailers and logos of their sites to give you kind of some information on who's fully 4R certified. So I know there's a couple agri retailers who have multiple locations. So the multiple locations are listed underneath the logos, but it's all on our What's in It for Our Me page.
As I've looked through the information on the 4R certification that retailers get, when I look at a lot of the practices, it is kind of time consuming, a lot of data record keeping to ensure you pass your audits. But as far as on a farmer's perspective, I really see that it's invaluable for the farmers because farmers now have the sense that, the retailers are doing what's in the best interest of the farm, for the environment, and also for the farmers themselves. So they're not, they're applying at the proper times, at the right rates, and everything's done at a really, really important level both for the farmer and for the environment, which I think is just great that the industry is moving forward in that area.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's pretty important, and of course, I think a key emphasis here is there is a lot of information and a lot of stuff through the audit program. That's why we have Paul and Lynn to work through it with the agri retailers and the independent crop consultants, but not really any onus on the growers to do much different. And often we're seeing when they need to make changes, it's often very small changes happening at the grower level in order to be compliant with the 4Rs. So it seems like a lot, especially for nutrient service providers, but we're able to help out and do the best we can, especially with the help of Paul and Lynn.
Probably another thing for farmers to recognize too is that if you are working with a 4R certified retailer and you thought you're going to have fertilizer spread, but they're calling for an inch of rain, you may be postponed, which is in the best interest of yourself and for the environment. So it's not a case where you got shuffled along. It's just weather conditions and weather forecasts change, and you really don't want to have a downpour rain right when you get fertilizer spread. So it's all in everybody's best interest.
No, for sure.
All right. Thanks, Kelsey, so much for joining us with this webinar. We really appreciate your support and Fertilizer Canada and getting farmers' fields a little bit more 4R certified across the province.
Well, thanks for having us today.
Not just you, Mike. Oh, dear. Okay. Today we have Anne Vermeersch from Tillvalley Farms. She's a farmer and CCA. Anne, could you tell us a little bit more about your farming operation?
Thank you, Laura. Yes, I farm with my husband, Jeff. We have about 1,200 acres of cash crop. We grow corn, soybeans, wheat, rye, and edible beans. and we're in Tillsonburg, Ontario. And the unique thing about Tillsonburg is that it's half in Oxford County and half in Norfolk County. So, I mean, we go south of Norfolk or south of Tillsonburg into Norfolk, and we're into the sands. We're in the tobacco sands, and we're on the north shore of Lake Erie. And then we go north of Tillsonburg, and it's all a lot of dairies and a lot of loam and great high productive soils. So we're in a really unique area in the province for sure.
That definitely is. That I didn't realize that with Tillsonburg that you had such a divide in that area. So that's interesting. As a farmer, Anne, what's the value of 4Rs to you?
Really, the value for me is that we can, like, I'm a farmer, I'm in business, so we want to increase profitability, but we can really increase the profitability per acre. And we do that by putting the right nutrients in the right places at the right time by following the 4R program. And really, our land is an investment for us. It's an investment currently and for the future generations. And it really is in our best interest to protect that land. And using the 4Rs is a good way or a good best management practice to ensure that land will be available for future generations.
Great. How has the 4R program impacted your farming operation, Anne, and how has it helped your goals environmentally or otherwise?
So, yeah, for sure. We farm on the north shore of Lake Erie, the sands in Norfolk. It's really, it's fragile land. We're in the Lake Erie watershed. We have a lot of natural diversity, some of the largest diversity in the whole country. We've really adopted a lot of variable rate technology. And we've done that basically because the sands are so fragile, and using variable rate technology, we're able to use technology to place nutrients where they need to be at the right rate. And then we're increasing profitability, but we're also being environmental stewards by not over applying nutrients where they're not necessary.
That's great. In general, from when you're working with farmers as the CCA, Anne, are the farmers and growers that you're working with aware of the 4R program and recommendations that they might be using on their farm and how they relate to the 4Rs?
I think farmers are definitely aware. I would say most likely cash crop farmers are more aware maybe than livestock producers in particular. Livestock producers are more manure focused. Cash crop producers are more, traditional fertilizer focused. But I think it's becoming more and more recognized in the industry as a lot of the retail channel partners are making growers aware of the 4R program.
Sure.
And I'm wondering, what are some of those practices that farmers, are doing that maybe they're not aware of that are 4Rs, but actually are 4Rs? Are there any practices you could comment on?
Yeah, in general, I would say a lot of nitrogen application would be 4R related in terms of split and multiple applications. So we're seeing a transition from a lot of just broadcast applications of all of your nitrogen up front on your crop, in a wheat crop per se, or corn crop, to more of a spoon feeding approach. So we'll put a little bit of nitrogen up front, and then we'll come back and we'll top dress, or we'll side drop, or we'll wide drop nitrogen later on in season. And they're doing that because, the plant doesn't need it all up front, and they're recognizing that, and then they're recognizing that there could be an environmental loss from putting it all up front. So if we spoon feed the crop throughout the season, it's a better value for the crop and for the environment.
And for the farmers, there's no doubt the 4Rs have been a great value to the farmers as well as producing their crops. I'm wondering, Anne, how often should farmers be soil sampling? Because soil sampling is one of the components of 4R2. What's your recommendations there?
My recommendation is every 2 to 3 years. Every 2 to 3 years, especially if it's a new farm or an uneven farm, until we get a good handle on what's going on those acres. I like to take soil samples. I recommend every 8 to 12 acres is my recommendations, and I do it based on zones. And I develop the zones from either yield map or soil type map. If it's a brand new farm or a rented farm you've never been on before that you're going to have for a number of years, I would recommend that a grower do a grid sampling program to start with so that nothing gets missed, because it's hard to develop those zones if you don't have a history there. So grid sampling on a 2 to 5 acre grid to start with. And then once you get a handle on the farm, then you can move to more of a zone sampling.
And digging into that a bit, what is the value of those grid sampling or zone sampling, for the field and for the farmer and your clients?
Yeah, those soil samples and the zone sampling and the grid sampling can become a base then for applying nutrients. So you can start grouping zones together and applying lime, for example. So if a farm needs lime, it generally doesn't need it over the entire farm, only certain zones, or some zones need more or less than others. And by having that base map, then you have a reason to be applying a certain rate instead of just putting a general rate across the entire farm.
Yeah, general rate, you just keep with that variability, right? So then if you can change your recommendations to those zones, you can probably even out your crop and even out your field, which is, so much better. Yep.
Exactly.
What is some of the reasons, like you probably have some farmers that don't think that they want to do soil sampling. What is some of the reasons that you hear from farmers that don't want a soil sample?
Definitely expense is one of them. For sure, it's expensive and something that they don't normally do, right? The retailer comes out or they call the lab to come and pull the samples. I think a lot gets lost in the interpretation. So we have good intentions and we go out and we pull the soil samples and we get the reports back, and then they go into a binder that sometimes goes on the shelf and we don't look at over the next couple of years.
And what is your answer to some of those farmers that are saying, well, it's too expensive to sample? How do you encourage them that they should be sampling?
I mean, farms are really, they're an investment, right? We need to be benchmarking our investment and reviewing our investment every couple of years. And for me, the only way you can review that investment is through a soil sample. I mean, you're obviously pulling yield off, so you know what your investment is producing, but we need to review those farms and see what's going on. And the soil sample is the best way to do that. And if we let the farm slide, so if we go too long, I've seen, people pull out soil samples from 10 years ago and that's all they have. If we're not addressing the needs of the soil sample, the farm can be so far gone in some cases in terms of nutrient levels that becomes very expensive and timely to improve the farm.
Yeah, I think a lot of farmers don't realize the change in the soil over time, right? With different management and different fertility practices, et cetera. It does change.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, a lot of and I'm picking on livestock producers a little bit, but they have so much manure, right? And there is a lot of value in manure, but yields have been increasing over the years, and over time we're taking off a lot of nutrients, and sometimes that manure isn't replacing all of that per se. So we need to really look at fine-tuning nutrients where they're needed.
So I'll pause there. I think the next section, Mike, were you going to cover off the CCAs and that?
Yeah, so thanks for those great comments, Ann. And I think now if we can get into some discussion around the CCA program and what that means for the 4R's and how CCAs incorporate 4R's within recommendations. And is it something that's really, I think we talk about the 4R's, and I think generally speaking, people have said, yeah, we're doing it, but could you maybe comment on how a CCA looks at the concept?
So yeah, as a CCA, we have to look at the whole circle or the entire pie, right? And each piece of the pie is really like the source of fertilizer we're using. So is it the right source for the right situation? Are we recommending the right rate for the right crop? Are we on a build program? Are we just doing crop removal? What does the soil test say? Those factors all go into making the right rate. And then when are we applying it? At what time? and at what place. And taking all those 4 pieces of the pie to make that recommendation to a grower into consideration.
Yeah, that's great. And then I think this leads into another question, and this is probably on the whole timing side of things. And we know that the spring can be a challenging time of year to get crop in, depending on rain and weather forecasts. Part of the 4Rs is maintaining that fertilizer applications don't happen prior to a heavy rainfall. So wondering if you could probably comment on that kind of side of things. You know, how do we have the conversation that maybe the best time to apply fertilizer, even though you have a tight time window, you know, isn't within 24 hours of a 1-inch rain, and what are some of the things we can do to help manage that situation a bit better?
Yeah, for sure. The spring is always crazy and it's a large crunch. But yeah, we need to be aware of what the weather is going to be and what nutrient application are we making and how is the weather going to affect that? Is that nutrient going to move a lot in the soil if we do apply it? And where are we applying it? What's the soil type, right? What are the risks associated with applying that nutrient? Are we going to see runoff? We're going to see leaching. Could the soil become could be denitrification if it's nitrogen applied on heavy soil? And really, what are the environmental features around the farm that could be at risk? So, I mean, each situation is different, but we need to get to an approach where we do a quick analysis of, you know, what are those potential risks versus rewards of applying a nutrient.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think this probably ties into some other weather related questions that we've received or a part of the 4Rs. And I think the whole concept of frozen or snow covered ground. And I think, you know, that's another part of our program, rightfully or wrongfully so. I think some people may think that that's a good idea, but you know, from your experience, obviously that's something that, you know, is a big no-no.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we cannot be applying nutrients, either fertilizer or manure, to any frozen or saturated soils. It's not good from a nutrient standpoint in terms of where the nutrient could end up in the environment. And if we're out there on the fields too, we're also impacting soil structure most of the time if we're trying to apply during saturated conditions. I mean, really, and a lot of growers now, especially manure, like we've got a lot more storage on farm, and growers are making great progress that way, that they can hold their manure for a long period of time and they don't need to be out applying it in conditions that aren't environmentally favorable.
Yeah, no, for sure. So just a couple of questions to round things out. And this is more or less around sensitive features on the farm. And I think that's something that maybe gets overlooked in some cases. You know, if someone's renting a field that maybe they're not as familiar with, and I think you touched on that a bit with the soil sampling side of things, but the other component within the 4R program is sensitive features such as, you know, natural inlets or hicking bottoms or those sorts of things. So what would you maybe suggest to growers that want to be in the 4R program and need to kind of map out some of those sensitive features? What would be a recommendation to kind of ensure that there's, you know, that conduit of information so that, you know, if you're having acres custom applied, that the applicator knows where some of these sensitive features are?
Yeah, I think as a landowner and a grower, yeah, we have a responsibility to understand what's on that farm and how our management practices can impact that, and sensitive features come into that for sure. We live in an age where there's a lot of imagery available. You don't necessarily have to have a computer. It's on your phone, it's on your tablet. I use Google Earth, Google Maps all the time. I whip it up on my phone. We do some custom applications. So if we're doing it on someone else's farm, I'll whip it up right in front of them on my iPad, and I'll say, okay, is there anything I need to know about this farm? Like understanding where the boundaries are, understanding if there's any ponds on the farm, are there any grass waterways that we should stay away from, tile outlets, tile blowouts, catch basins, those types of things. And I mean, it takes time, but normally you're on the same farm year over year over year. So you need to take the time to understand where those things are so that the mistakes aren't made, and we're not spreading fertilizer too closely to a pond, or we're not applying things over grass waterways where it's not necessary. So I think it goes back to, yeah, growers definitely having the responsibility to ensure that they understand where all those features are, and that they're communicated to anyone else that might be on that property.
No, that's great. That makes a lot of sense. And I think it comes back to what has been discussed already, is having the conversation and just the transparency, whether it is on a soil sample and soil test, or the custom applicator and some of the sensitive features that may be on a farm. So with that, I think that summarizes very nicely the 4Rs in a quick segment. And very much thank you, Ann, today for both the farmer perspective, but also CCA perspective on what the 4Rs mean, and how growers can better understand and better implement the 4Rs on their farm. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ann.
Thanks, Ann.
Is that a cut?